I'm Tara, and on behalf of NEDAP, I would like to welcome you to today's breakout presentation, Preparing Changing Tactics in Animal Rights Activism. NEDAP is a proud supporter of this morning's presentation. NEDAP Livestock Management on the dairy sector is most known for our cow control product that is offered through a matrix of leading milk equipment and genetic companies in North America. It's real-life actionable insights, not only on individual herd levels, but individual animal level, but also on a herd level. So when we look at becoming more efficient and looking at barriers that we have in the marketplace, we look towards our technology to really lead you into a more profitable, sustainable future. With that, I would really like to introduce Emily to you guys. Emily, as the Animal Ag Alliance's communication specialist, works to execute the Alliance's issue management and communication strategy. Emily is responsible for managing the organization's social media platforms, the planning and execution of the College Aggies online program, and development of materials for various stakeholders to support the Alliance's mission of safeguarding the future of animal agriculture. She also assists in issues outreach campaigns, media relations, and representing the Alliance at various industry meetings. Prior to joining the Alliance team, Emily served as communication manager for the Maryland Farm Bureau and held several internships within the animal agriculture industry, including communication interns for the Alliance. Emily holds a BS in animal science from the University of Maryland. She joined the Alliance team in 2020 and lives in East Tennessee with her dog, Charlotte May. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you for that introduction. Animal rights activism is nothing new, but their tactics continue to change and evolve. This is all part of their ultimate goal and their end mission to end animal agriculture, to take animal products, meat, poultry, dairy, eggs off of our table and eliminate consumer choice. In my presentation today, Preparing for Changing Tactics in Animal Rights Activism, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the different tactics that activists are using, as well as some tips for how you can better prepare yourself, your livelihood, your family from potential activist threats. So animal rights activists, their main goal is to target our target audiences, so whether that be investors, consumers, policymakers, whoever it is that we're trying to reach, they're trying to place a wedge between us and those target audiences. They're reaching out to restaurant and retail brands, they're reaching out to policymakers, legislators, they're trying to share their perceived side of the story, how they perceive animal agriculture, so that we cannot make our voices heard, so that our voices are not being trusted, and really they're just eroding how the general public is viewing the animal agriculture community. So as you can see on this graph, us in the animal agriculture community, we're over to the one side in the blue. Those are people that we very strongly support animal agriculture. We have a very positive view of animal agriculture. It doesn't really matter too much what people say to us or what people show us. We're not going to change our opinion. We already have made up our mind about how we feel about the issue. And on the other side of the spectrum, in that orange section, that's where animal rights activists sit. They are on the complete opposite side of the spectrum. They are very set in their beliefs and how they view animal agriculture, and it doesn't matter what we say to them, what we show them, they're not going to change their minds either. So for that reason, it's really important just to know that we don't encourage engagement with these groups. We don't encourage conversations to try to change their mind or to try to debate their ideologies, because a lot of times you'll both just end up frustrated and not really make a lot of progress. What we recommend is focusing on the middle group in the center, the green portion, which is the reasonable majority or the movable middle. That's luckily for us where most people sit. They're very indifferent. They can kind of go both ways on the issue depending on what information they hear, what they might see. So that's really our target audience. That's the groups that we're trying to reach. So that's really important to keep in mind as we continue our discussion on animal rights activists. Animal rights activism is big business. This is just a number of the groups that we monitor. I think on our resource center of our website, we have over 180 group profiles and still a number more of other groups that we don't have profiles on. And those listed on this web right here, they're just our biggest groups. They're the groups that we follow most closely. In the center, you'll see groups like HSUS, Mercy for Animals, PETA, some of the more well-known groups. And these are groups that a lot of times appear more moderate. So the media thinks of them more moderately, legislators think of them more moderately. They think that these are groups that are simply interested in animal welfare, protecting the overall well-being of animals. And then on the outskirts of this web, you see more extreme groups. So groups like Direct Action Everywhere, which you'll hear me talk quite a bit about. Groups like Anonymous for the Voiceless, groups that are out there committing crimes. They're very eager to commit these crimes. They really have no qualms about committing these crimes or trespassing or doing any of these bad things. So there are seemingly more moderate and more extreme groups, but as you can see here on this web, they are all very interconnected. They're connected through collaboration on different projects. They're connected on funding, moving between the different groups, and also staff members that move from one organization to the other. So no matter how moderate a group might seem or how extreme a group is, they all share the same ultimate goals. And don't just take my word for it. This is some quotes that we've taken from a number of different animal rights conferences that we've had some representatives attend, really showcasing what these groups' true motives are, what their true agenda is. A representative from HSUS said that my goal is the abolition of all animal agriculture. Wayne Shung, who is the founder of Direct Action Everywhere, said that we are trying to destroy animal agriculture. So no matter where they sit, again, on that spectrum of moderate, seemingly moderate versus extreme, they all share that same goal. They want to take animal proteins, animal products off of our table and ultimately eliminate that choice in the grocery store. So moving into some of the tactics that we see pretty frequently with these groups, the first one is the most well-known, and that's the use of undercover videos. This has been around for quite a while, and it's a tactic that we see most groups using in their strategy to reach their ultimate goals. This either entails trespassing onto farms to obtain this footage, or it entails someone seeking undercover employment at a farm or at a facility so that they can obtain whatever footage it is to twist and match whatever narrative or campaign that they're currently running with. One thing I want to draw your attention to on this slide is on the left-hand side on the bottom. That is actually a job posting from Mercy for Animals where they are searching for an undercover investigator. So they're openly posting on job sites like Indeed that are looking for people to fill this position as an undercover investigator, where they're getting paid by this activist organization to obtain employment at the targeted farm, at the targeted facility or company, so that they can go and obtain this undercover footage that this activist organization will then use for an undercover video. So again, this is one of the biggest tactics. It's one of the biggest ones that we see used by activist groups across all spectrums of that map, moderate to extreme. So it's one to be aware of for sure. Similarly, we are seeing a lot more use of drones and frontline surveillance in the activist strategy. So we've seen a lot of cases where activists will fly drones over properties or facilities, or even in some cases, I believe it was in Pennsylvania, we had someone fly a drone through a turkey barn where they were able to either get footage or just provide some type of surveillance where they can get a lay of the property, see where different practices are taking place, see where different types of animals are being held, and get a good understanding if they decide later they want to come in, trespass, try to take footage, or conduct some other type of action. Again, going along with the undercover video, installing cameras and recording devices is another tactic that we're really seeing kind of an uptick in. There's a number of ways that activists are going ahead and doing this. Sometimes they're trespassing onto the property, installing the camera or recording devices, and then planning to come back later to retrieve those devices and whatever footage or recording they were able to obtain. Or we're also seeing now that there's new technology where these activists can actually plant these cameras or these recording devices, and then those recording devices will actually send that information or that footage to another device off-site, so that if for some reason the device is found, it's confiscated, or they no longer are able to get in to take that device, they actually have all of the information that they need and that they're looking for already on some other device off-site, so they don't have to worry about losing it. So that's another thing that we're seeing an uptick in their strategy. Mass protests are also being used. Luckily, this isn't one that we see quite as frequently, but we have seen it used a couple times, particularly with the group Direct Action Everywhere. Just last fall, Direct Action Everywhere held their annual conference in California, and as part of their conference, as part of kind of the finale event, they visited a local processing facility. They rented a U-Haul, parked the U-Haul right out front of the facility, and then did a lockdown where they used the sleeping dragon technique, which is a very new technique that we're hearing about, where essentially activists will handcuff themselves together within a PVC pipe. Sometimes they'll have concrete on top of that, which makes it very difficult for police officers and law enforcement to remove them from the scene, and that's their goal. They want to be there as long as possible. They want to be a disruption as long as possible. But that was just one example of a mass protest. They bussed hundreds of activists out to the processing facility to conduct a number of actions. They stole birds. They were having chants and protests right out front of the facility, and then using that sleeping dragon technique as well. A more infamous one, again by this group Direct Action Everywhere, was conducted a couple years ago, where as part of this same conference, they bussed hundreds of activists to a local poultry farm, and the activists actually stormed onto the property, went right into the barn, stole a number of birds, and then walked right out in a big group, as law enforcement was there to watch them as they did it. So luckily, again, not something that we see very frequently, but another tactic to be aware of. Home protest is a newer tactic that we're seeing where essentially activist groups will pick a company, their target company, and they will find executives in that company and where they live, and they will go to their personal home. So if they're putting pressure on a company to adopt a certain policy or to change something specific that goes along with their campaign, and that company refuses to make that policy change, they'll then pick a secondary target, which would be one of these executives. They'll go to their house, they'll protest out front, they'll put on a big show in front of all of their neighbors, so that telling them that this person supports animal cruelty, this person supports the killing of what they call sentient beings, really all to put pressure on that one person so that they end up bending to their demands and bending to their pressure and enacting whatever policy it is that they're going after. We've seen them do this targeting the American Veterinary Medical Association. We've seen them do this with Smithfield and a number of other companies as well. So it is seemingly a growing tactic that we're seeing being used by animal rights activists. I already mentioned this previously, but breaking onto farms, trespassing, stealing animals, that's a tactic that we are seeing quite a bit as well. A lot of times activists will go onto farms late at night when there's no one there or when there's less security. When it's dark, it's easier for them to get into the property and have access. And they'll take animals so that they can show them on social media. They can say, look at us, we were successful in retrieving this animal. A lot of times they'll use the terminology that they rescued the animal or that the animal needed saving because it was being abused on this facility. And they really make it a show when they take these animals. They'll also sometimes try to find a sympathetic farmer or employee, facility owner that sympathizes with their cause a little bit, or just wants to get them off of their property, get them to leave them alone, and they'll try to get this person to release an animal to them, again, so that they can make a big show about it, so that they can say that this farmer knows this animal was being abused, this farmer knows this animal deserves better, so they decided to release it to the activists so that they can properly care for it. So that is something that we're seeing as well. We obviously don't encourage people releasing animals to activists. Again, there's no benefit in engaging with these groups. You're not going to make headway. You're really not going to make progress. You're not going to be able to change their mind. All you're doing is helping them get more attention for their cause. Supply chain disruptions is a newer tactic, again, that we're seeing. So going back to the Direct Action Everywhere conference that I mentioned in California this past fall, where they rented the U-Haul truck, placed it out front of the facility. The purpose of placing that U-Haul truck out front and then the activists being in those sleeping dragon devices that make it hard for them to be removed, they stated in a press release that their goal was that they wanted to disrupt the supply chain. So they're really trying to capitalize on the COVID-19 pandemic and the supply chain struggles that a lot of the animal agriculture community ran into. They're trying to recreate that in a sense. They thought that the entrance that they were blocking was the only entrance into the property. They thought that they were going to stall a couple hours. This was about a 7-hour-long protest. That's how long it took for law enforcement to get the devices removed and get these activists out of the way. There was law enforcement on site when the activists parked the truck. The law enforcement had been trained on how to remove activists from this sleeping dragon technique. It does require a specialized training. But unfortunately, that county did not have the specialized equipment that was also required. So they had to wait for the next county over that had the equipment to bring it in to be able to remove these activists. So they were there for 7 to 8 hours is how long the protest went on. Thankfully, there actually were other entrances into the property, so they didn't end up reaching their goal of disrupting the supply chain. But it is something to be aware of, and we highly encourage reaching out to local law enforcement. We'll talk about this a little bit later. But making sure that your local law enforcement is trained on the sleeping dragon technique, does know what it is, and that they're in the process of getting the equipment that they need. Because if something like this happens and there's not a nearby county that has this equipment, there's no telling how long that protest can go on for. Corporate pressure campaigns are also another tactic that we see. This a lot of times ties in with restaurant, retail, food service brands. So where these groups are trying to put pressure on these brands to adopt certain sourcing policies. In the egg community, a big one right now is pushing for cage-free eggs. In the pork community, they're really trying to phase out the use of gestation stalls. So they have a number of campaigns. All the activist groups are running different campaigns and focused on different issues. And they're all trying to put a lot of pressure on these brands to change their sourcing policies so that it forces farmers and ranchers to change the practices that they're doing. It doesn't matter that researchers and specialists in this area that know animal welfare, that have done the research, they've done the studies, know that a certain practice is better. These activists don't care. They're using an incremental approach. So that's essentially where maybe right now they're trying to get the egg community to completely phase to cage-free eggs. That's one step, but once they have a good number of facilities transition to cage-free eggs, then they're going to want to take it a step further. Then they're going to want all of their laying hens to be raised down on pasture. And they use these incremental steps as kind of a stepping stone to, again, reach that ultimate end goal, which is to eliminate animal agriculture. So, again, that's how they seem more moderate. They provide or they propose a policy or a solution that maybe doesn't sound terrible. To restaurant and retail brands, they see cage-free eggs is not a terrible thing. They don't understand how much of an impact it would have on the animal ag community. But activists are seeing it as one step closer to ultimately reaching their goal. We also see a lot of legislative campaigns, and this especially the ballot initiatives. We've really seen an uptick in this. You all are probably aware of the PAWS Act. That was a ballot initiative in Colorado, where essentially they were trying to make it a criminal activity to participate in certain common animal husbandry practices, including the use of artificial insemination, was going to be a criminal activity in the state of Colorado if this ballot initiative passed. Activist groups are using these ballot initiatives because it completely bypasses the legislative process. They don't have to go in and testify. It doesn't give really anybody else the opportunity to share their side of the story. It really just relies on human emotion. It relies on a lack of the general public's understanding of animal agriculture, of common practices, why these practices are done. So we really are seeing an uptick in the use of ballot initiatives. Similarly, there's also, so luckily the PAWS Act in Colorado did not pass. It is no longer allowed to continue, but in Oregon there is still a very similar ballot initiative that is still going on. It's in the signature collecting phase right now, and it too would criminalize a lot of those basic animal husbandry practices, and it would essentially make Oregon a sanctuary state. So in this ballot initiative, I believe animals would have to live until the end of their natural lifespan, so they can't be sent to market prior to their natural lifespan, prior to them dying of natural causes, essentially, which would have huge impacts on the animal agriculture community. But that's just one other example of an activist-led ballot initiative that, again, preys on human emotion, preys on the general public's lack of understanding of animal agriculture and the practices that we use. So now that I've shown you a lot of the common tactics that we're seeing, I want to talk to you more about what you guys can do about it, because there are opportunities for you to be proactive both on your farm and on your facility, and also with those external and target audiences that we're trying to reach, to try to mitigate some of the disinformation that animal rights activists are spreading and mitigate some of the trouble that they might be causing for the animal ag community. Our first recommendation is to start on the farm, and we call this YouTube proofing your farm. So essentially, if someone were to come on your farm, or even if it was you yourself, and you're trying to take a YouTube video of your farm or of your facility, is there anything that concerns you on your property that you wouldn't want to post on YouTube, that you wouldn't want just anybody to happen across? Is there anything that you think there are areas that maybe you could improve upon? This is essentially kind of taking an audit of your farm, seeing what areas you might be able to make a little bit better, improve in certain areas, and making sure that you're showcasing your farm to the best ability that you can. Because a lot of times when activists come onto farms and take those undercover videos, obviously they're not going to send you a note that they're planning to be there tomorrow night, so be ready. So you really have to kind of be on your toes at all times. Make sure that you have certain things in place, that you're following animal welfare guidelines, that you have certain policies in place, that your employees are trained on those policies, and that they're following those policies. One of the biggest things that we see when it comes to undercover videos is not that the farm had bad policies, it's not that the farm didn't have animal welfare guidelines that they subscribe to. A lot of times it's just they have a rotten employee. They have an employee that isn't showcasing the farm as well as they could. They're not following the policies as they should be, and they get that farm in a lot of trouble, and they ultimately are hurting that farm's reputation as well as the animal ag community in general. Some basic farm security recommendations that we really encourage all farms and facilities to have in place includes the use of basic security, like having offices locked, having areas of the farm where maybe some controversial practices are being done, where some proprietary information is being held, making sure that you have basic security on those areas, that it's not easy if an activist trespasses onto your farm at night to be able to access those areas, to be able to access that information. Having proper lighting can be really great, especially like I mentioned, activists will try to break onto your property at nighttime. So having some type of lighting system in place that might alert you to an activist or someone being there that shouldn't be there is a really great recommendation. If you have the ability to install some type of surveillance system or security cameras, we've seen a lot of success with farms and facilities that have implemented those surveillance cameras and security systems, where they've actually been able to identify, maybe they saw something that didn't seem right, or maybe they noticed some suspicious activity, they can then go back and check their security camera and they can see, okay, we had someone here that wasn't meant to be here. And in some cases, they've sent it to us. We were actually able to identify the activists that we monitor pretty closely that we know of and share that information with local law enforcement. So it's definitely helpful to have some type of surveillance system, because most of the time they're not going to come on your property when you're there, when all of your employees are around, when it's daylight. It's easy for them to be spotted. We'll talk about the next bullet points in more detail on the next slide, but thoroughly screening all job applicants and visitors, again, having proactive conversations with law enforcement, developing a crisis communication plan before something happens, and then you'll hear me mention this many times, but reporting any suspicious activity either to the Animal Ag Alliance or to your local or state or even national association that you belong to, so that we can all be kept in the loop and that we can provide guidance and support as needed if you do run into some potential activist activity. So when it comes to hiring, like I mentioned, a lot of times our employees can be the ones that give us a bad reputation if we're not hiring carefully. So our first recommendation is to have some type of employment application, a written application where the applicant has to put all of their information, their name, all of that employment data that you need, so that you have it on file, you have a hard copy that you can use if you run into any trouble. We also recommend having references and making sure that you call those references. If an employee is applying for a job and say that they used to work at Walmart back in the day and they list their Walmart supervisor as a past reference, make sure that you're calling that store's Walmart number from, like, search it on Google, find the company number, and then call that number and ask to be transferred to whoever the supervisor is that they're trying to connect you with. Don't take any information at face value, because activists are very deceptive. They are not above lying. They are not above misleading you about who they are. So it's very important that you are taking all precautions and making sure that they really truly are who they say that they are. And really our biggest tip for hiring is look out for any red flags and trust your gut. If there's something that doesn't sit well with you, don't just kind of brush it off. I know things are really tough, especially when it's hard to find people that want to work on the farm or work at these facilities, but it really can save you a lot of headache if it's preventing a potential activist attack or potential activist threat. So trust your gut. If there's something that doesn't sit right with you, explore it further, and don't brush past anything that could potentially become an issue later down the road. When it comes to visitors, we recommend having some type of policy in place so that you, your family, employees, anyone who's on the farm regularly knows this policy. They know what to do if a visitor does come, so that they're not just letting someone walk around the farm or letting them have really free reign of the property. If someone does come on your farm that you're not expecting, you don't know them, make sure that you're asking for their credentials, that you're finding out who they are, and that you're verifying that they are who they say they are, because again, activists are not above misleading you or telling you that they aren't who they say they are. We've had multiple cases where activists or suspicious people have come onto farms saying that they work with an insurance company and that they're there to check something out. But if the employee and the farm owner know nothing about this, they're wondering, why is this person actually here? And sometimes, and a lot of times, it's because that they're not actually who they say they are. That's just an excuse for them to try to gain access to the property. So make sure that you are verifying that they are who they say they are. Don't take any of their claims at face value. You want to verify everything that's said to you. Get as much information as possible, and if they do seem suspicious, you don't want to grant them access to your property, make sure that you're reporting that activity again to your local, state, association, or to the Animal Ag Alliance, so we can be there to support you and guide you through the potential threat. If you do decide to give them access to the farm, they are who they say they are, you want to give them the ability to walk around the farm or see something that they came to see, make sure that you escort them at all times. Don't just give them free reign of the property. And then be careful about any information requests that you might get, because they could be looking to spread information that maybe you're not wanting to spread, or could just be trying to get more information about the farm so that they can access it later. I mentioned that protest is a really big tactic that we see, so we really encourage having some type of plan in place to prevent possible protest by animal rights activists. Like I mentioned, don't engage with animal rights activists if you do come upon one or do have some type of interaction with an animal rights activist. They're trying to get under your skin. They're trying to make you mad. A lot of times they'll live stream onto Facebook or some other social media platform, or they'll just record you so that they can use this footage for later. So do not interact with them. Do not give in to them. They're looking for you to get upset, to make a scene so that they can use that later for some other campaign. So don't give them anything to work with. If they do show up, contact law enforcement immediately. Make sure that they know and that they are aware that you do have these people on your farm. Let them handle any conversations. They're the experts when it comes to this, so just let them be the ones that engage with these protesters. And lastly, turn the camera on these protesters. They're not going to like it, but they're going to put a camera on you a lot of times. They're going to try to live stream you, to video you, like I mentioned. So don't be afraid to do the same thing as to them and get any actions that they're doing on camera, because a lot of times this can be helpful to law enforcement later if you do decide to press charges, or if legal proceedings do take place. Also, be sure to get any descriptions. So any protesters that are there, try to get descriptions of as many people as you can, as well as license plate numbers, vehicle make. All of that information is really helpful for law enforcement as well. Conversations with law enforcement. This is one of our biggest recommendations that we have for farmers and ranchers, is to make sure that you're having proactive conversations with law enforcement. A lot of times people think that, if you're on the West Coast or you're on the East Coast, then you have to worry about animal rights activism. And they kind of think if you're in that lucky middle space of the country that animal rights activism isn't a threat, it isn't a worry. But unfortunately, that's not the case. So it is always better to be safe than sorry, to be proactive rather than reactive. So make sure that you're having proactive conversations with your local law enforcement. You're explaining the threat of animal rights activism. You're explaining some of the main groups to watch out for, some of the tactics that they're using. Really build a relationship with your local law enforcement. Invite them out to your farm so that they can see the property. They can get a good lay of the land. So if you call them up one day, you say that you're in this field by this barn, they'll have a better understanding or a better idea of where you're at. They can get there more promptly. But it's also a really great opportunity to show them what you do on your farm, how you care for your animals, the policies that you have in place. That's one of the biggest claims that animal rights activists will make, is that animal cruelty or animal abuse is taking place at this farm or at this facility. So if this law enforcement has already been to your property, they've already seen how the animals are raised, how they're cared for, they'll have a much better understanding, and they'll be less likely to believe the claims that these activist groups are making. And then I think this is my last farm security tip, but be proactive and have some type of crisis plan in place now. Don't wait for the crisis to strike to start putting all of these pieces together. Have a plan in place. Be ready so that if a crisis does strike, you already know what you're doing. You already know who your core people are. They already know what their responsibilities are, and they're handling it. So this includes having certain contact lists, so that could be to the local law enforcement, having drafted statements so that you're ready to go if you get any media inquiries about a certain issue or certain, maybe it's a video that was shown on social media. Again, be prepared to contact your state association or the alliance to let them know of the activist activity. Launch an internal investigation or some type of third-party audit if there was something shown. A lot of times this is in undercover videos. Maybe there was something shown that isn't a practice that your farm condones. So launching some type of investigation or audit will allow you to kind of alleviate that issue and fix that problem area. And then just be ready for additional activity. What we've found is that a lot of times activists once they target you once, you are unfortunately more likely to be targeted again in the future. Your farm or your facility is already on their radar, so just be prepared that something could potentially happen again in the future. Outside of farm security recommendations, we also recommend being proactive online, on social media, and in your communities as well, and making sure that you're having, again, those proactive conversations with your target audiences. Don't let any concerns about animal rights activism prevent you from having those conversations and building those relationships, because they can really help you in the long run if you have those conversations and those relationships proactively. So build your trust bank in advance. Ultimately, be as transparent as possible. That's one of the biggest claims and talking points that we hear from animal rights activists, is that the animal agriculture community is so closed off. They're so, they lack transparency. They won't let anyone see what they're actually doing. So finding a way to share what you're doing on your farm is a great way to try to bridge that gap a little bit. So connecting with local legislators, engaging on social media, having conversations with just your neighbors, even something as simple as that can really go a long way. So really, we encourage you to do your due diligence and make sure that you're having those proactive conversations. Because if you build those relationships proactively, when a crisis or an issue does strike, you've already got those relationships. They already see you as a resource, as an expert on this issue, and they're more likely to go to you to get more information than to go to Google or an animal rights activist or someone or somewhere that doesn't necessarily have the true information. So what we're doing and how we can help. The Alliance is a nonprofit organization focused on safeguarding the future of animal agriculture and its value to society by bridging the communication gap between farm and fork, or between the farm and food communities. And our motto is that we connect, engage, and protect. We connect by bringing together all of the different sectors of the animal agriculture community, so beef, dairy, pork, the broiler community, you name it. We bring all of those different groups within animal agriculture together so that we can be united on emerging issues and different things that we are all focused on and concerned about. One of the programs that we do within our Connect section of our motto is our Animal Ag Allies program. This is a new program. It launched in the summer of 2020. And it's focused on farmers, ranchers, practicing veterinarians, really anyone with their boots on the ground, to empower them to be stronger and more outspoken advocates for agriculture. So there's two parts to the program. The first part is in online modules. So there are 5 modules that'll give you kind of an overview of the different animal agriculture sectors, how to reach out in public, how to have conversations with media, conduct interviews, how to reach your target audience on social media and really get outside of the ag echo chamber that a lot of times we find ourselves stuck in. And those modules can be done at your own pace. And then the second part of the program is when you are added to a private forum online where you can interact with other farm influencers like Farm Babe, Rebecca Hilby from Farming with the Hilbys, a Wisconsin dairy farmer. I believe she's in the group as well. So people who are really, truly good at what they do, good at having those conversations, are there as a resource for you in that group. So more information about that is on our website, www.animalagalliance.org. And then similarly, we have our College Aggies Online Scholarship Competition, which is similar, but it's more geared towards college students and provides them the opportunity to win scholarship money during the 9-week competition. It's held every fall, so there's also more information about that on our website. The engaged portion of what we do is where we reach out to restaurant, retail, food service brands, thought leaders, dietitians, really anyone that plays a role or has an influence on consumer buying decisions. We try to make connections with those groups and position ourselves as a resource for them if they have questions about animal rights activism or modern animal agriculture. And then lastly is protect, which is what we talked about today, where essentially We do a lot of animal rights activist monitoring. We have a number of farm security resources and crisis planning resources that we update frequently and are available to our members on our website. And lastly, I wanted to invite you all to our 2022 Stakeholder Summit, which will be held May 11th and 12th in Kansas City, Missouri. This event brings together really all the different links along the food supply chain to come together to engage on different issues that the entire animal ag community and food community is facing. So this year's event will be held in Kansas City. Registration is open, and again, more information about that is on our website. And then we're active on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. And with that, I will wrap up and happy to take any questions that you all might have. Yes. So the question was, if you are targeted by animal rights activists, like I mentioned, a lot of times these activist groups will live stream or share the video on social media. So the question was, how do you find that live stream? We know a lot of the groups at the Alliance. Like I mentioned, we actively monitor these groups. So a lot of times we can tell just by the activists involved what group they might belong to. A lot of times Facebook seems to be the biggest social media platform for them to live stream on. So you can go on Facebook, search for that group. A lot of times, farmers and ranchers probably aren't as aware of the different animal rights groups, the many different activists that make up those groups. So that's why it's really helpful to reach out to your local or state association or even the Alliance. And my contact information is up on the screen if you guys do need to reach out. But reaching out to us, we can a lot of times kind of monitor the information or see if there's anything that we've seen in the groups that we monitor come out about the activist organization. Yes. So the question was, when a calf or another animal is stolen, do the activists have any idea what they're going to do with it when they take it home? A lot of times, no, they probably don't. I don't know that they fully are thinking about that. They're probably just thinking this is going to look great on social media that we were able to confiscate this calf. But we do see a lot of activists will end up sending them to sanctuaries. But I don't know that they fully think through some of their plans. They did not. I'm not positive, but I can pretty much guarantee you they did not. Yes. Yep. So the question was, a lot of times these extremist groups, they try to humanize animals, that they want to see humans and animals on equal playing field. So how do we change that? And one of the great ways that I mentioned is just having proactive conversations with your target audiences. Again, don't worry about the activist groups. Don't worry about those extremists that have completely different ideologies than all of us have. Really focus on that reasonable majority, and they're called the reasonable majority for a reason. They're probably a little bit more reasonable to interact with and a little bit more understanding of our viewpoint than they would be of a very extreme viewpoint of animal rights activists. So focus on that group and really try to have those conversations. Most of them probably are already under the same understanding that animals and humans are not the same. Animal rights activists, just like a lot of times the animal ag community can get stuck in our own echo chambers, animal rights extremists, they suffer with that same exact thing. So even though they can make a lot of noise, luckily for us, they don't reach a lot of people in that reasonable majority. So I just encourage you all to have those conversations. Make sure that you're reaching out to those people and trying to talk to them about modern animal agriculture. Talk to them about how you care for your animals, but that you also understand that animals and humans are not the same. They don't deserve personhood. We care for them, but they are not on the same playing field as us. I think it's just about being proactive and trying to have those conversations. Yes. Yes, I love that point. She mentioned that a lot of times farmers and ranchers are some of the biggest people that are sharing and interacting with undercover videos and undercover footage that makes the animal agriculture community look terrible. So we fully encourage you to not share it. Don't comment on it. Don't interact with it. Don't engage with any of the negativity. Honestly, the biggest thing that we can recommend is be positive. Focus on the positive things that animal agriculture is doing. And again, that kind of ties in with being proactive, not reactive. Proactively share the good and the positive information. Don't reactively respond to an article or to a video that comes out that negatively portrays the animal ag community, because you might be making some good points and getting some of your viewpoints across, but you're also sharing and amplifying that other negative message. So wholeheartedly agree with that statement to not engage with any activist content. All right, well, with that, I thank you all for joining me today. Again, if the Alliance can be of any support or guidance, or you hopefully don't run into any potential activist activity, but we strongly encourage being proactive and putting farm security practices in place. But if we can be of any guidance or support, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Emily, so much. I know we're all going to step out of this room much more prepared than when we entered on the ever-evolving tactics utilized by the animal activists that we have out there. We'd like to thank you again for your time and thank NEDAP for their sponsorship of this session. Let's see. For